Welcome to All the F Words,
a podcast where two writer friends, nearly 30 years apart, explore everything we give an F about. I'm Gabby Moskowitz.
And I'm Joanne Green. On each episode of All the F Words, we'll focus on a theme starting with the letter F. Things like family, foibles, fertility, and fun.
We'll share stories from our lives and distinct generational perspectives, and we'll look to the experts for insights and ideas.
Today, we're going to be talking about firstborns, what it's like to grow up as one, what it's like to raise them, and what some researchers theorize they tend to have in common.
It's been really interesting researching this one because the research has been all over the place, and I'm so excited to dive into this with you.
All over the place in that researchers have come up with different conclusions?
Lots of different conclusions, and it's, I'm almost more interested in the anecdotal experience that I've had and that other people I've talked to have had about both being a firstborn and raising them. So you are, as I understand, not a firstborn. Is that right?
I am the baby of the family by a mile.
By a mile. Okay. So what's your age span with your siblings?
My brother was 13 when I was born. My sister was 8.
Wow.
So I believe the affectionate way to describe that is that I was an oops baby or a pleasant surprise. One might also call me a mistake. Happy accident. But in fact, my existence was an accident, which is part of why my memoir is entitled By Accident, because it's a play on words. But enough about that. So I didn't really feel like I fit in because I was so much later, right? All my cousins were the same age as my brother or my sister. My parents were much older than everybody else's parents. So yeah,
your siblings were in totally vastly different life phases than you were at every time in their lives. They
100%. And they were children of the 50s, and I was very much a child of the 60s. Big difference.
Interesting.
As opposed to you, who are firstborn, right?
I am a firstborn. I have a brother who is 3 years younger than I am. So, in terms of the generation we grew up in is very much the same. But I very much identify with a lot of some of the common things that are said about firstborns. So we should start at the beginning, which is where the concept of birth order theory came from. There are two researchers who started talking about birth order as being meaningful in any way. The first was this guy named Francis Galton, who was coincidentally a half cousin of Charles Darwin. And he published a book called Men of Science, Their Nature and Nurture, in which he profiled 180 prominent scientists. This is in 1874. And one thing he noticed was that firstborns were vastly overrepresented. So this initially came from the idea that firstborns tended, in his research, to be more successful. And when you saw... in the case of this study, it was men, because it was 1874. They often tended to be firstborns. So I thought that was interesting. That gets followed up by Alfred Adler in, I believe, 1964. And he was a student of Freud, and he studied birth order really deeply. And he came up with this for first, middle, last, and only children, some traits and characteristics that were really consistent across the board. So for firstborns, he found that they often tended to be natural leaders, high achievers, organized, on time, know-it-alls, bossy, responsible, adult pleasers, and rule obeyers. So that is sort of the
does that ring
backbone.
true for you? Does that ring true for you personally and also for your firstborn, Anna?
A lot of it does for both. I would not describe Anna as being super into obeying the rules, but I definitely would call myself someone who does that. I am really I think, I think some people might describe me as controlling, and I think other people might describe me as, some other words here, like a natural leader, for example. But it comes up for me a lot when there's the planning of any sort of event. I want to be in charge of it all. So yeah, it definitely applies to me as a firstborn. I think where it gets a little tricky is when you start thinking of these words as being an end all be all of a personality. But when you think about your older brother, do you feel like that applies to him? These words?
Not really, actually. Interestingly enough, some of them, but not all of them. I would say definitely not adult pleaser or obey the rules. Bossy, maybe, not so much. Definitely on time and organized and high achiever. Yeah, those things. But as you say, this isn't a panacea. I've read a couple of other pieces that described characteristics of firstborn children a little bit differently. Words like reliable, conscientious, structured, cautious, controlling, sometimes seen as bossy, achievers, want to excel at everything, and bask in parents' attention. So I think there are so many factors that impact this. Whether the parents were young when they had the firstborn child, whether they were older, whether their life was in a period of flux or stress, whether they were, relaxed and calm and had all their needs met and were able to just focus on the child. So many factors.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because one thing that kept coming up was that one thing that they have in common is that they are the first and only children of these parents. And so the parents are simultaneously total amateurs. They're brand new at parenting. They've never done it before. And they are, so they're both novices, but they also have significantly more time to devote to to their new baby. And depending on
One might
how
say
long,
obsessional in some cases.
that would be my experience. Yes. And so, so that is one of the things that I found came up as like I said, the research really varied, but that was the thing that tended to be the predictor of whatever the traits ended up being. It was what happened in that early time, and how did the oldest child, if they ended up having siblings, respond to the addition of additional siblings, and what was their role like when those siblings were added to the family. So, I'm curious, what was it like? Well, I want to know two things. I want to know what it was like for you or what it was like for your siblings when at age 13 or age 8, they learned that there was going to be another baby added to the family. And because you have two sons, one of whom, Danny, is of course a firstborn. What was your experience of him as a firstborn in regards to all of this?
Okay, so given the fact that I don't think I was exactly a planned birth, the sense I get, or that I've gotten over the course of my life, is that my mom was embarrassed to be pregnant with a teenager. And my brother and I didn't really bond in the way that siblings ideally bond. And I think it was because she kept us really separate, that she didn't want his life impacted by the fact that she had a baby. So he never held me. This is my theory. I tried to talk about it with him once and didn't get very far. It was also a very different era. I was born in the 50s, when maybe boys weren't expected to deal with babies. I don't know, or not encouraged to do so. My sister, on the other hand, bonded very much with me, and as an 8-year-old, child was very involved with me and throughout my childhood. And we had a very close relationship. Both my siblings have passed away. So I talk about them in the past tense. I just wanted to explain why. Regarding Danny, when I read these lists of qualities, I absolutely feel like he's pretty much of a classic firstborn. Here's another list that I found: independent, care for others, leaders, hard workers, more likely to take direction, less likely to engage in risky behaviors. So that would, I think, go along with obeys the rules. Now, what I think is that Danny was treated by me in particular, and I would say probably us, meaning my husband and me, as the greatest thing, just the best, the first, the only, right? Like I'm imagining the Lion King, like that music, la da da, like there he is, and he responded well to all of that attention and nurturing. And as I've done more research over the years, and certainly in preparation for this show, I see how some of the things that we did maybe weren't so helpful. And
like what?
Right? So, well, one thing I see here, let your firstborn child make her own decisions, right? So we think of our firstborns as being the best at everything. But often we then try to mold them into the best at whatever we decide we want them to be the best at. So we're constantly grooming them, and to be this high performer, high achiever in a certain area. So in fact, they may not have any interest in being that. So you should really let them try out all different sorts of things and see what they like and make their own decisions about what they're going to specialize.
Because second-born children and, subsequent kids have the benefit of having more experienced parents. They may not have as much, attention from the outset, but they have parents who've been doing it for longer. I certainly felt that way when I had Sasha. I may not have had the same amount of time to spend just, luxuriating in our solo bonding time in the same way I did with Anna, my firstborn, but I knew what I was doing better. I was much more confident. And so I think that subsequently born kids have more confident parents. And so in some ways, I'm curious if maybe we tend to project a little less onto them. Like Anna and I mean, the transition from firstborn to secondborn is a whole thing for a parent. But I feel like when Anna was just this concept, it was like, wow, I am going to be a mother. We are going to be parents. And so my fantasies of who she would be and what she would become were so much bigger before she was born. And then, of course, she was born, and I saw that she had a whole personality and plans of her own. But with Sasha, I knew that was going to happen. And so I think I really, not only when I was pregnant with her was I worrying about also taking care of my toddler, so I wasn't fantasizing about what sort of person she was going to become in the same way, but I knew how it was going to go, that I wasn't going to have the kind of control that I thought I was going to have. So I didn't have to go through learning that lesson with her. So, that can be seen, I think, as both a benefit and, I don't know, whatever it is to not have your parents project who they want you to be onto them is both a blessing and a curse, I would guess.
I would think so. Firstborns, I think, often are very eager to please their parents. My experience has been secondborns are much more eager to please their peers. They care less about what their parents and their parents' friends and their aunts and uncles think of them, that's not who they're trying to impress. They're trying to impress other kids, in particular older kids, because they want the approval of their sibling and peers.